She was walking home alone, a black woman, pregnant, tired from a double shift in the emergency room, carrying groceries in both hands, just trying to survive another night. And then 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They didn't say a word. They just pushed her, hard, in the cold, wet mud of the sidewalk. Your bags flew, your purchases scattered across the sidewalk. And she lay there, 4 months pregnant, with her hand flat against her belly, looking at a man with a gold tooth who was standing over her as if she were nothing, as if she were nobody. He bent down and said, "Tell your boyfriend that the Hwang clan doesn't protect everyone." Then they left, laughing. What those men didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined in their worst nightmare, was that somewhere on the other side of the city, in a penthouse surrounded by men in suits, a Korean Mafia boss was already watching every second of what they had just done, in a surveillance feed, in real time. And the silence that fell over that room, it was the most dangerous sound in the city that night. But here's what no one predicted. Not the mafia boss, not the men who pushed it, not even the criminal who ordered everything. She didn't need to be saved. What she did next changed everything. Before starting the story, comment here from where you are watching and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel. The rain had stopped exactly 14 minutes before Amara Sinclair stepped out of the grocery store. But the sidewalks were still lit, still treacherous, still gleaming under the amber glow of street lamps that flickered the way they always did on Cortlandt Avenue after 10 at night. She had 2 bags in her left hand and her tote on her right shoulder, heavy with the weight of the things she needed and the things she had promised herself she would not think about. 4 months. She was 4 months along, and she still had not told him. She had not told anyone. That was the thing about Amara. She carried weight the way other people carried secrets, quietly, deep in the body, never letting it change the way she walked. And she walked the same way she always did. Spine straight, chin parallel to the ground, heels meeting the pavement with a steadiness that belonged to someone who had learned very early that showing hesitation was a form of invitation. She had grown up in a house where her mother was the only pillar, and that pillar had never buckled, not once, not in front of her. Amara had inherited that architecture. It lived in her bones. She did not notice the 3 men until she had already passed them. They were standing near the mouth of an alley between a laundromat and a shuttered convenience store. 3 men who did not belong to that neighborhood in any visible way, who had the particular stillness of people waiting for something specific. The leader had a gold tooth that caught the lamplight when he turned his head. A spiderweb tattoo spread across his left elbow, dark and deliberate. The kind of marking that meant something in certain rooms and nothing in others. His name was Marcus Riley, and he had been paid a very specific amount of money to deliver a very specific message. He had not been paid enough to ask questions. He had not been paid enough to notice the small swell beneath her black cropped shirt. He had not been paid enough to care. He moved first. The push came from behind and to the right. Not a punch, not a grab, but a calculated shove to the shoulder that used momentum against momentum, that exploited the exact second when one foot was lifted and the other was bearing full weight. Amara had no time to process what was happening before the bags left her hands and the ground came up fast and the cold, wet mud of the sidewalk met her knees, then her hip, then her palm. The groceries scattered. An orange rolled into the street. The small gold crescent pendant that hung from her neck swung outward and skittered against the concrete and lay still. She did not scream. She lay in the mud for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which her mind did something very specific. Something she had trained it to do over years in emergency rooms, where panic was a luxury that cost other people their lives. She assessed. She cataloged. Left knee. Pain. Bruised, not broken. Right palm. Scraped, bleeding slightly. Abdomen. No sharp pain, no cramping. The baby. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and she breathed. And beneath the chaos of the moment, she felt nothing wrong. The baby was still. The baby was fine. She looked up. Marcus was standing over her the way men stand when they want you to understand that standing over you is something they chose. He looked down at her without expression. Not cruelty exactly, more the blank efficiency of someone completing a transaction. "Tell your boyfriend," he said, "that the Huang clan doesn't protect everyone." He didn't wait for a response. He turned, and his 2 companions fell into step behind him, and within 30 seconds they had dissolved into the network of streets the way men like that always do, as if the city itself made room for them. Amara did not move immediately. She stayed on the ground for a moment longer than necessary, and anyone watching might have thought she was in shock. She was not in shock. She was memorizing. The gold tooth, the spiderweb, the cadence of his voice, American accented, Midwest somewhere, slightly nasal. The way the second man favored his left leg, the smell of a specific brand of cigarette she recognized from hospital waiting rooms. She was filing every detail with the same careful attention she brought to patient charts, the same discipline that had made her the nurse that attending physicians called when they needed the notes to be right the first time. She was building something. She did not know yet what she would do with it. She picked up what she could. She left the orange. She found the pendant on the sidewalk and held it in her palm for a moment. A thin gold crescent on a delicate chain, the only gift she had ever accepted from him, given without ceremony through a mutual friend the month after she had told him she was leaving. She had almost thrown it away 6 different times. She hadn't. She pressed it into her pocket and she stood. And she walked home. What Amara did not know, what she could not have known, was that the lamppost on the northeast corner of Cortlandt and 5th housed a camera that was not a city camera. It was small, weatherproof housing, wide-angle lens. It had been installed 11 months ago by a man named Hack, who worked for Kwon Jae-won, and whose entire professional function was to ensure that the 12-block radius around Amara Sinclair's apartment was never entirely dark to the organization. Jae-won had never told her. He had known she would leave him if she found out. She had left him for far less, for the single moment when she had understood, really understood, what the suits and the silence and the men who never looked directly at her actually meant. She had looked at him that evening with an expression that was not fear and not anger, but something worse. Clarity. And then she had packed a single bag and walked out of his penthouse and had not looked back. He had let her go. Because loving someone in his world was the most efficient way to destroy them. He had watched what happened to people who mattered to men like him. He had made a calculation. The calculation was failing. 31 seconds after Amara stood up from the mud of Cortlandt Avenue, the alert reached Hack's phone. 40 seconds after that, Hack had reviewed the footage. 48 seconds after that, he placed a call. Kwon Jae-won was sitting across from a man he was in the middle of negotiating with, a man who had flown from Seoul specifically for this meeting, a man who represented money that would have solved 3 operational problems simultaneously. He was mid-sentence when his phone vibrated against the glass table. He did not look at it. He did not look at it the second time it vibrated. On the third vibration, Hack's emergency protocol, he picked it up without apology and walked to the far end of the room and watched a 22-second clip of footage on a 4-inch screen. He watched it once. The room was very quiet when he returned to the table. The man from Seoul was still seated, recalibrating. Jae-won straightened his cufflinks. He looked at the man directly. "Cancel the rest of the week," he said. Not to the man from Seoul, to the room. He was already reaching for his jacket. What no one in that room understood, what even Hack, who knew him better than most, did not fully understand, was that the expression on Jae-won's face as he walked out was not anger. Anger was something he had left behind years ago. It was inefficient. It made people sloppy. What moved through him as he walked toward the elevator, as the doors closed and he was finally alone, was something much colder and much more precise. It was the specific feeling of a man who had made a calculation and had just learned that the variable he had removed from the equation had never actually left it. The elevator doors opened to the underground garage, and Jae-won stepped out into the cold concrete silence without breaking stride. Hak was already there, standing beside the black SUV with the engine running, the way he always was. Present before being summoned, a quality that had kept him alive in a profession where most men did not survive their 30s. Jae-won did not get in the car immediately. He stood at the rear door for a moment, hand resting on the frame, and looked at nothing in particular. Hak, who had learned over 9 years of service that silence from this man was a language with its own grammar, waited. The tattoo on his elbow. Jae-won said finally. "Spiderweb. Did you run it?" "Already sent to the database," Hak said. "We'll have a name within the hour." "I want the name in 20 minutes. Hak did not point out that 20 minutes was not enough time. He picked up his phone. They drove without speaking. The city moved past the tinted windows like a film playing for someone else's benefit. Yellow cabs, late pedestrians, a bodega with a broken sign blinking in irregular rhythm. Jae-won sat with his hands resting on his knees and his eyes forward, and he was doing the thing he always did in the space between information and action. He was building the shape of what had happened. Someone had paid for that. Someone had known Amara's name, her neighborhood, her route home, and had considered her a useful instrument. That specificity was the detail that mattered. Random violence did not arrive with a message. Random violence did not reference the Hwang clan by name. This was a communication, and communications in his world had senders. The question was not who had pushed Amara Sinclair into the mud on Cortlandt Avenue. The question was who had decided that touching her would reach him. His phone buzzed. A photo. A man in his early 20s, heavyset, shaved head, gold tooth visible even in the low-resolution arrest record image. Marcus Riley. 3 priors. Aggravated assault, unlawful possession, 1 dropped charge of extortion. No organizational affiliation on record, which meant he worked freelance, which meant he had been hired specifically and recently by someone who needed distance between themselves and the message. Jae-won stared at the photograph for a long time. Not at Marcus Riley's face, at the employer field that read, unaffiliated. "Find me who hired him," he said. "We're already pulling his last 3 months of communications. Pull 6. The car moved through the city, and Jae-won looked out the window and thought about Amara lying in the mud on a wet sidewalk with her groceries scattered around her, and he thought about the way she had pressed her hand against her stomach before she stood up. and he told himself it was a reflexive gesture, a protective instinct, nothing more. He told himself that. He moved on. He did not move on. Amara's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that had been constructed in 1974 and had not been significantly updated since. The elevator worked only intermittently. Tonight it was working, and she rode it up in silence, her tote on her shoulder, mud drying on her cargo pants, the crescent pendant still in her jacket pocket where she had put it on the street. When she stepped into the hallway, Mrs. Okafor from 4B was coming out of her own apartment with a bag of recycling, and she looked at Amara with the quick assessment of a woman who had raised 5 children and missed very little. "You fell?" she asked. "Uneven sidewalk," Amara said. She smiled. It reached exactly as far as her cheekbones. Mrs. Okafor looked at her for one more second with the particular expression of someone choosing not to press. And then she nodded and went toward the recycling chute. And Amara unlocked her door and went inside. The apartment was small and clean in the way that small apartments become clean when the person living in them needs control over at least one environment. Everything had a place. The ultrasound was on the bathroom wall, taped at a precise angle beside the mirror. She had put it there specifically so she would see it every morning before she left, and every night when she came home. A discipline she had assigned herself because she had learned in nursing school that the body adjusts to what it sees regularly. That repetition builds acceptance. She had needed to accept this before she could begin to plan. She showered. She cleaned the scrape on her palm with the methodical efficiency of someone who treated wounds for a living. She put antibiotic ointment on her knee and wrapped it, and then stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her robe and looked at herself for a long moment. The baby was fine. She had confirmed it. No cramping, no spotting, no cause for concern. She had assessed herself the way she would have assessed any patient who came into the emergency room after a fall. Clinically, without flinching. The baby was 4 months old and growing on schedule and was, by every measure she could apply without an ultrasound machine in front of her, fine. But the man with the gold tooth had known her name. He had not said it, but the message had been addressed to her neighborhood, her route, her habits. Someone had mapped her, and that meant someone had looked at her and seen not a person, but a coordinate, a point on a map that led somewhere else. That was a specific kind of danger. It was not the kind that responded to new locks on the door or a different route home. She sat at the kitchen table and she opened her phone and she looked at the contact saved as J, and she held the phone in her hand for a very long time. She thought about the last night she had spent in his penthouse, the way he had stood at the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city with his hands in his pockets and his jacket off and the dragon tattoo visible along his neck, and how beautiful and how completely unreachable he had looked, like something that had been built specifically to exist at a distance. She had asked him a simple question that night. She had asked him if there was any version of his life in which she was safe. He had not answered. He had turned from the window and looked at her with those dark, still eyes, and his silence had been the most honest thing he had ever said to her. She had packed one bag and left. She put the phone face down on the table. Then she did something that Kwon Jae-won, with all of his surveillance and all of his resources and all of the careful architecture of monitoring he had built around her life, did not anticipate. She opened her laptop. She went to her email. She opened a thread that had been dormant for 4 months. A thread with a federal investigator named Carla Mendez, who had made contact with Amara 8 months ago after finding her name in a peripheral document during a racketeering investigation. Amara had not responded at the time. She had not known what she wanted to do. She had been, at that point, still deciding what she was. She knew now. She did not write the email yet. She opened a separate document, and she began to write down, in the precise and ordered language of someone trained to document, everything she remembered about the man on the sidewalk. The gold tooth. The spiderweb tattoo. Left elbow, inside, roughly 3 inches across. Older ink, based on the slight fading at the edges. The way he had held his body. The cigarette brand. Marlboro Red. She had smelled it close when he leaned over her. The specific chemical sweetness of that particular tobacco. The second man's gait. The direction they had walked when they left. Then she added one more detail. A detail that had surfaced slowly during the shower. Rising the way important things always rose for her. Through layers of noise and adrenaline, until it became clear. 3 weeks ago, leaving the night shift at the hospital at 2 a.m, she had seen a man sitting in a parked car across from the staff entrance. She had noticed him because he had been there the previous week as well. Same car, slightly different position, but the same man. She had flagged it to hospital security, and they had filed an incident report. There was a camera above the staff entrance. There was a timestamp. There was a record. The spiderweb on the elbow had been visible through the car window. She added this to the document. She read it back once. Then she opened the email to Carla Mendez, and she began to type. She was building something, yes. She had known that on the sidewalk. She just had not known yet that she was building a case, and that it would close before anyone expected it to, including the man who was, at that exact moment, sitting in a black SUV 3 miles away, trying to find the person who had hurt her. Marcus Riley was not a difficult man to find. That was the problem with men who worked freelance at the lower edges of organized crime. They existed in the visible world. They had phones registered to real addresses. They had associates who drank at the same 3 bars. They had habits, and habits were coordinates. And coordinates were, in Jae-won's world, simply a different kind of door. It took Hak 43 minutes. Not 20, because 20 had never been realistic, and both of them had known that. But 43 was close enough that Hak delivered the location without apology, and Jae-won accepted it without comment. That was the economy of their working relationship. Precision over speed, results over theater. The warehouse was in the industrial stretch south of the port, the kind of building that existed in every major city in a specific functional way. Windowless on 3 sides, accessible from a service road that did not appear on standard navigation maps. Owned through a chain of holding companies that terminated in a name that meant nothing. Jae-won's organization had used buildings like this for specific purposes over the years. He knew their acoustics. He knew how sound behaved in a space with concrete floors and steel ceilings. He knew that men spoke differently inside them, more carefully, or not carefully enough. Marcus Riley, when they brought him in, spoke not carefully enough. He tried humor first. Men who were frightened and wanted not to appear frightened almost always tried humor first. It was a social reflex, an attempt to normalize the room, to suggest that whatever was happening was something that could be navigated with personality. Jae-won had watched it hundreds of times. He let it run its course. He was standing near the far wall with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets when the humor stopped and the silence took its place. Marcus was seated. 2 of Hak's men stood at a distance that was close enough to be felt, but far enough to allow the illusion of space. It was a deliberate geometry. Jae-won walked slowly to the center of the room. He looked at Marcus with the particular quality of attention that had nothing performing in it. No anger, no theater, nothing designed to intimidate through drama. just attention. The kind that made people feel accurately seen, which was, in its own way, more unsettling than anything theatrical. You knew who she was, Taewon said. It was not a question. Marcus shifted his weight. I was given a name and a photo. That's all I work with. You were given a name and a photo, Taewon repeated. He let that sit. And the name meant nothing to you. I don't ask about names. I don't ask about reasons. I get a job, Who gave you the job? The silence that followed was not the silence of a man deciding whether to speak. It was the silence of a man calculating which answer cost him less. Taewon recognized it. He waited. I need something in return, Marcus said. You need, Taewon said very quietly, to understand the difference between a negotiation and a situation. This is a situation. Another silence. Shorter this time. Song, Marcus said. Director Song. That's the name I was given. I've never met him in person. Everything came through an intermediary. A woman, mid-40s, goes by the name Ellen. She contacted me through a forum, paid in 3 installments. The last one came through this morning after... He stopped. After the job was done. Taewon finished. Marcus nodded. Taewon said nothing for a long moment. He turned away from Marcus and walked back toward the wall and stood there, and his mind was moving the way it moved when information arrived that reorganized everything. Not quickly, not with visible urgency, but with the slow and thorough reordering of a man who had been playing a game for years and had just been shown that the board was larger than he had believed. Director Song. The name arrived with a history attached to it, the way all significant names did. Song Byung-il had been a senior figure in the Hwang clan's financial infrastructure for 11 years. Not an enforcer, not a strategist, but an architect. He had built the money channels that moved the organization's revenue through legitimate shells and into deployable assets. He had been, for those 11 years, trusted in the specific and limited way that people in that world were trusted. Not because of loyalty, but because his prosperity was structurally dependent on the organization's prosperity. They had been aligned. 2 years ago, that alignment had fractured. Song had been removed, quietly, without public escalation, after an internal audit revealed that he had been skimming from secondary accounts in amounts small enough to suggest patience and large enough to suggest intention. The removal had been clean. No violence, no dramatic confrontation. Jae-won had simply closed the doors Song needed to remain functional and then waited for Song to understand that the closing was permanent. Song had understood. He had gone quiet. He had, to all visible indicators, accepted his situation. He had not accepted his situation. He had spent 2 years building towards something, and the something, apparently, was not a direct attack on the organization's operations or personnel. It was a message, a demonstration that the Hwang clan's reach had edges, that those edges could be found and touched, that Kwon Jae-won, for all of his surveillance and all of his geometry, could not protect everyone. He had chosen Amara because she was the most efficient instrument available, not because she was valuable to the operation, because she was valuable to Jae-won. Song had known about Amara. That was the information that reordered the board. Song had known, which meant the knowledge had come from somewhere inside. A fragment of a conversation, a photograph, a name mentioned once in the wrong room. The perimeter had been breached not through force, but through information. through the quiet and patient accumulation of a detail that should never have been visible. Jae-won stood at the wall and thought about that for exactly as long as he allowed himself to think about things that could not be immediately solved. Then he turned back to Marcus. "The forum," he said. "The one Ellen used to contact you. Do you still have access to it?" Marcus hesitated. "Yeah." "You're going to give Hack every login credential you have. Every message. Every intermediary name attached to those threads. And then what happens to me?" Jae-won looked at him. "That depends on whether everything you've told me verifies." He left the warehouse without waiting for a response. In the car, driving back through the city, Hack placed the first call to begin tracing the Song network, quietly, laterally, through channels that would not announce themselves until it was too late to matter. Jae-won sat in the back and looked at his phone and thought about the name Director Song, and thought about Amara on the wet sidewalk, and thought about something else. A smaller thing, a detail he had not addressed yet, because the operational priorities had organized themselves around it. She had pressed her hand against her stomach before she stood up. He had watched the footage once, one time, but he was a man whose mind retained images with uncomfortable fidelity, and that image, her palm flat against her abdomen, the specific quality of that gesture, protective and involuntary and intimate, had not left him. It sat at the edge of every thought he had completed in the last 3 hours, patient and persistent, waiting to be addressed. He did not address it. He looked out the window and he watched the city move past. And he told himself it was a reflexive gesture. He almost believed it. Amara sent the email to Carla Mendez at 11:47 at night. It was not a short email. It contained the incident report number from the hospital security log, the timestamp of the camera footage above the staff entrance, a physical description detailed enough to be actionable, and a note, careful, measured, written 3 times before she was satisfied with its phrasing, explaining that she believed the individual she had flagged 3 weeks ago was the same individual who had been involved in an incident on Cortlandt Avenue earlier that evening, and that she had reason to believe the incident was connected to an organized criminal operation that Mendez's office had been investigating. She did not name Jae-won. She did not name the Hwang clan. She named only what she could verify, what she had seen, what she had recorded through proper channels, what existed in documentation that had been filed before she had any reason to file it strategically. She hit send. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and breathed. She was not naive about what she had just done. She understood that sending that email was a door opening, that once it opened, it could not be closed. That Carla Mendez would move quickly because investigators who had been building cases for months moved quickly when a clean thread presented itself. She understood that things would accelerate now in ways she could not fully control. She also understood, and this was the thing she had been sitting with since the sidewalk, since the mud, since the moment she had looked up at Marcus Riley's empty face and heard him say the name Hwang clan, that she had never actually been in control. She had told herself for 4 months that leaving Jae-won's world was a form of control, that distance was protection, that if she simply was not there, the proximity would not reach her. The sidewalk had answered that. She was already in it. She had been in it the moment she met him, the moment she allowed herself to understand what he was and stayed anyway. The moment the crescent pendant arrived through a mutual friend and she had put it on and not taken it off for 6 months. She had told herself she was outside. She had never been outside. The question now was not how to get out. The question was what to do from inside. She picked up the crescent pendant from where she had placed it on the table. She held it in the light. She thought about a man standing at a floor-to-ceiling window with his hands in his pockets, and about a silence that had been the most honest thing she had ever received from anyone. And she felt, not warmly, not with comfort, but with the particular clarity of someone who had just stopped lying to themselves, that she had loved him anyway, that she still did, that love and incompatibility were not mutually exclusive, and that knowing this changed nothing practical and everything else. She put the pendant back on. Her phone lit up on the table. Not a call. An email notification. Carla Mendez responding at 11:53 at night, 6 minutes after Amara had sent her message. The subject line read, "I've been waiting for this. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" Amara read it twice. She typed back, 7 a.m. You choose the location. She closed the laptop. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked to the bedroom and she lay down on top of the covers, still dressed, and she put her hand on her stomach in the dark. Deliberately this time. Consciously. Not the reflexive gesture of a woman who had just fallen, but the intentional act of a woman making a decision about what she was protecting and how. The baby moved. Barely. A flutter. The kind that was so small it could almost be dismissed as imagination. She had been feeling it for 2 weeks. She still held her breath each time, still felt the particular wonder of it, still could not fully reconcile the fact of it with the rest of her life. "I know," she said quietly, to no one. To the dark, to the small moving thing that was neither of them yet, and both of them already. "I know. We're going to be fine." She believed it, not because she had been told, because she had decided. 14:03. The morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of morning that withheld itself. No real sunrise, just a gradual brightening of the clouds from black to the color of old concrete, the city reassembling itself beneath it with the mechanical indifference it applied to all mornings, regardless of what had happened the night before. Amara was already dressed when her alarm went off at 6:15. She had slept in 4-hour stretches, which was normal for her. Emergency night shifts had restructured her relationship with sleep years ago, teaching her body to rest in segments rather than continuums. She had woken at 2 and lain still for a while, listening to the building's particular nighttime vocabulary of pipes and settling beams and the distant, irregular percussion of the city. And she had thought about nothing specific and everything simultaneously, the way the mind does when it has processed as much as it can consciously process and hands the remainder to deeper mechanisms. She made tea instead of coffee. She had switched to tea at 4 months, quietly, without announcement, without telling anyone why, the same way she had switched her sleep position and started taking the elevator instead of the stairs, and begun carrying a small bottle of water in her tote at all times. The adjustments were invisible and cumulative and entirely her own. She drank the tea standing at the kitchen window, looking down at Cortlandt Avenue 4 floors below. The sidewalk was dry now. You could not tell from this height that anything had happened on it. She picked up her tote. She put the crescent pendant beneath her shirt so it rested against her skin. She left. Carla Mendez had chosen a diner 8 blocks from the Federal Building, a place with vinyl booths and laminated menus and coffee that arrived without being requested, the kind of establishment that had been serving the same demographic of tired and purposeful people for 40 years and had developed, over that time, a practiced incuriosity about conversations held quietly in its booths. She was already there when Amara arrived at 6:58, seated in the back corner with a manila folder closed on the table in front of her and a cup of coffee she had not touched. She was a compact woman in her late 40s, Puerto Rican, with close-cropped silver hair that she had clearly stopped managing some years ago, and a quality of stillness that Amara recognized. The stillness of someone who had learned, professionally, to make space for other people to fill. She stood when Amara approached and shook her hand with a directness that skipped the preliminary social calibrations most people engaged in. "You look like you had a difficult night," Mendez said, not unkindly. "I had a productive one," Amara said and sat down. Mendez opened the folder. She had printed Amara's email, the full text, and had made notes in the margins in a small, dense handwriting that Amara could not read from across the table. She pushed the folder to one side and looked at Amara directly. "8 months ago, when I first made contact, you didn't respond," Mendez said. "No. And now you're here." "Someone pushed me into the mud on Cortlandt Avenue and referenced the Huang clan by name," Amara said. "I reassessed my position." Mendez was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Were you hurt?" "My knee. Nothing significant." "Were you—" Mendez paused. She glanced briefly, almost imperceptibly, at Amara's midsection, then back up. It was a professional glance, the kind that registered and moved on. "Were you alone?" "I'm always alone," Amara said. Then, because that had sounded like something it wasn't, "Yes, I was alone." Mendez nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "The incident report you referenced. The hospital camera footage. Our office can pull that through standard channels without your name being attached to the request. The timestamp you gave us puts him at a location that connects to 2 other sightings we've had in the last 6 weeks. Sightings we hadn't been able to link to anything specific. You've just given us the thread." "Marcus Riley," Amara said. Mendez looked at her carefully. "You know his name?" I looked up the spiderweb tattoo. Left elbow, that specific design, that approximate ink. There are only a few people in the system with that combination. His arrest record is public. He has a prior in this city from 4 years ago. She paused. "I had time last night." Mendez studied her for a long moment with the expression of someone recalibrating an assessment. "Miss Sinclair." Amara. "What I'm about to tell you is outside the standard scope of what I would share with a civilian witness. I'm telling you because you've just handed me something that took my office 8 months to get close to, and because I think you deserve to understand what you're in the middle of." She paused. "Song Byung-il. Do you know that name?" The name landed on the table between them like a stone dropped into still water. Amara watched the surface of Mendez's expression for information and found very little. She kept her own face equally still. "I've heard it," she said, carefully. "He's been under investigation for 14 months. Financial crimes initially. Wire fraud, money laundering through a chain of import businesses. But 14 months of pulling that thread has led us somewhere larger." Mendez leaned forward slightly. "Song was a senior financial architect for the Huang clan for over a decade. He was removed 2 years ago under circumstances our office has been trying to document. What we believe, what we have been trying to prove, is that his removal was precipitated by internal theft, and that since his removal, he has been actively working to destabilize the organization through a series of targeted provocations designed to look like external threats." Amara was quiet. "Last night was not random," Mendez continued. "You were chosen specifically, and the reason you were chosen—" She stopped. She looked at Amara with a kind of careful respect. "I think you already know the reason." "Because of my connection to Kwon Jae-won," Amara said. The name was the first time she had said it aloud to anyone outside of that world, and it felt strange in her mouth. Too large for the diner, too specific for the morning light coming through the window. Song wanted to send a message. He used me as the instrument. Yes. Mendez held her gaze. Which means that whatever you provide us, testimony, documentation, the hospital footage, it becomes part of a federal case that will move quickly once it moves. Song's people will know, within a relatively short window, that the thread has been pulled. And when they know that, they'll know it came from somewhere close to Jae-won. Amara finished. Yes. The diner moved around them. A server refilling someone's coffee 3 booths away, the bell above the door as someone came in from the cold, the low register of a television in the kitchen playing morning news. Amara sat with the full weight of what Mendez had just described, and she did not look away from it. She thought about 4 months of silence. 4 months of a door she had chosen to leave closed. She thought about a baby that did not yet have a name, that was growing in the specific and unstoppable way that things grew when they had decided to exist. She thought about a man in a black suit standing at a penthouse window, choosing not to answer a question that deserved an answer, and how that choice had been, in its own terrible way, a form of love. The worst kind. The kind that protected by abandoning. That kept something safe by leaving it alone in the world. She thought about what she was, under all of it. A woman who had grown up without a pillar and had become one. A woman who documented, who remembered, who built things from fragments that other people overlooked. A woman who had been pushed into the mud and had lain there for 3 seconds, 3 careful, methodical seconds, and had cataloged everything before she stood up. "I'll give you everything," she said. "The incident report, the footage access, the description, everything I documented last night. And if you need me to testify formally, I will do that too." Mendez nodded. She opened the folder again and produced a single sheet of paper. "I'll need you to sign a witness cooperation agreement. It's not a commitment to testify. It's a documentation of your voluntary participation. You can withdraw at any point, though I want you to understand that once the investigation accelerates, withdrawal becomes complicated," Amara said. "Yes." Amara picked up the pen that Mendez offered. She held it for a moment, looking at the paper, and in that moment she thought, clearly, without drama, with the same clinical precision she brought to everything, about what she was signing. Not just the paper, the decision the paper represented. The version of her life that began on the other side of this signature. She signed it. She put the pen down. She looked at Mendez. "How long?" she asked. "Once we have the footage and the incident report connected to the broader network, days. Maybe less. Song has been careful. But careful people leave careful trails, and careful trails are the most complete ones." Mendez closed the folder. "You should know. The man you identified, Riley. He's not the only thread we'll pull. He's the one that will unravel the rest." Amara nodded. She picked up her tote. She stood. "One more thing," Mendez said. Amara paused. "Kwon Jae-won's organization. We're not going after them through this case. Song is our focus. Whatever Jae-won's people are doing in response to last night." She paused carefully. "We're not interfering with that, and we're not asking you to." Amara looked at her. "You're telling me his people are already moving. I'm telling you that our surveillance of Song's network detected unusual activity beginning approximately 45 minutes after the incident on Cortlandt Avenue, which suggests that someone on Jae-won's side became aware of what happened very quickly." She held Amara's gaze with the steady, informative look of a woman who was giving more than she was technically required to give. Very quickly. Amara held that information. She held it the way she held everything, without visible reaction, processing internally, filing accurately. "Thank you," she said. She walked out of the diner into the gray morning. She did not go home. She walked. Not the direct route, not the familiar one, but a longer path that took her along the waterfront, where the cold came off the water in slow-moving sheets, and the city on the opposite shore looked clean and theoretical from a distance. She walked with her hand in her jacket pocket, fingers touching the shape of her phone, not taking it out. She was thinking about a version of events in which she called the contact saved as Jay and told him what she had done, and watched what happened next from close enough to see it clearly. She was thinking about another version in which she said nothing, and let the federal case proceed, and let whatever Jae-won was doing proceed simultaneously, and waited to see which resolution arrived first. She was thinking, underneath all of it, about a third version, one in which those two things were not separate, one in which a woman who had signed a cooperation agreement and a man who had canceled the rest of his week were, without coordination, without communication, working toward the same outcome from opposite directions. One in which the thing that had always made them incompatible, his world, her refusal of it, had not disappeared, but had, in the space of a single wet night on Cortlandt Avenue, become briefly, precisely, the same world. She stopped walking. She was at the waterfront railing, the water dark below her, the city behind her. She took out her phone. She opened the contact saved as J. She typed, "I know about Song. I've handled it. Don't ask me how." She looked at the message for a long time. She deleted it. She typed it again, word for word, identical. She looked at it again. She sent it. She put the phone in her pocket. She kept walking. Jae-won's phone was on the table in the penthouse when the message arrived. Face up, which was unusual, which was the result of a night in which he had not slept and had been waiting, without acknowledging that he was waiting, for something he could not have precisely named. He read the message once. He read it again. "I know about Song. I've handled it. Don't ask me how." He sat with it. He sat with what it meant. Not operationally, he understood that almost immediately, understood that she had found a way to close the door on Song through channels that were not his channels, that she had moved while he was still moving, that the woman he had spent 9 months monitoring from a careful distance had resolved in one night what his entire organization had spent 3 hours beginning to build toward. He sat with what it meant underneath that, what it said about who she was, what it said about who he had always, somewhere beneath the calculation, known her to be. Not a coordinate, not a person to be protected from a distance, but someone who had been, all along, more capable of navigating his world than he had allowed himself to believe. He had removed her from the equation to protect her. He had never considered that she might solve the equation herself. He picked up the phone. He typed, "Are you safe?" Her response came 90 seconds later. "Yes. Are you going to ask me how?" He almost smiled. He typed, "No." A pause, then, "Good." He put the phone down. He stood. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and stood there the way he always did. Hands in pockets, city below, the gray morning light making everything look temporary and precise. He thought about what came next. Operationally, Song would be handled, through Mendez's federal case or through his own channels, or through the particular convergence of both that seemed, improbably, to be what had actually happened. The immediate threat was closing. What remained was everything that was not operational. He picked up the phone again. He typed, "Can I come to you?" The pause before her response was long enough that he had time to fully understand that he did not know what he wanted the answer to be. That he was, for the first time in longer than he could calculate, genuinely uncertain, genuinely without a strategy, genuinely asking instead of arranging. Her response, "Knock first." He put on his jacket. He told Hack to bring the car around. He stood at the elevator and pressed the button and waited. And in the waiting, he allowed himself to feel, briefly and without managing it, the specific and unfamiliar weight of hope. Not the hope that things would return to what they had been, because what they had been was a beautiful and structurally unsound thing, but the hope that what came next might be built differently. On different terms. On terms that she set, or that they set together, or that neither of them set because some things did not require architecture so much as they required two people deciding, in the same moment, to walk through the same door. The elevator opened. He stepped in. The doors closed. She heard the knock at 10:47 in the morning. 3 knocks, deliberate, evenly spaced, the knock of a man who had decided to ask permission and was asking it precisely. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. She was still in her jacket. She had not been home long. She looked at the door and she thought about everything on the other side of it. Not just the man, but everything the man carried. The weight and the danger and the impossible specific beauty of a thing she had never been able to fully put down, even when she had chosen to walk away from it. She thought about her daughter. She did not know yet that it was a daughter. She would find out in 3 weeks at the next appointment, and she would cry in the car afterward in the specific way that she never cried in front of anyone. Quietly and completely, out of something that was not sadness. But she felt it somehow, in the way that the body knows things before the mind confirms them. She put her hand flat against her stomach, deliberately, the way she had learned to do. Then she walked to the door. She put her hand on the knob. She opened it. Jae-won was standing in the hallway in his black suit, white shirt with 2 buttons open, the dragon tattoo visible at his neck, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the ring on his finger. All of it, exactly as he always was, exactly as she had carried him in her memory for 4 months. Except for his face. His face was doing something it almost never did. It was asking. He looked at her. He looked at the way she was standing, the way her jacket fell, the small change in the shape of her that he had been refusing to name since he watched the footage on a 4-inch screen in the back of a car the night before. He did not speak for a long moment. "Amara," he said finally. Her name in his mouth. Just her name, with nothing performed in it. No strategy, no management, just the sound of a man saying the word that mattered most to him. She stepped back from the door. An invitation. "Come in," she said. "But we're going to talk. Actually talk. And you're going to answer the question you didn't answer the last time." He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression. Not the fracture she might have expected, not collapse, but something more like recognition. The look of a man who had been carrying a right answer for a long time and had finally arrived at the moment that required him to give it. He stepped inside. She closed the door behind him. Outside on Cortlandt Avenue, the gray morning was lifting. Not to brightness exactly, but to something more honest. The kind of light that showed things as they were, rather than as anyone needed them to be. The wet sidewalk where she had lain in the mud 14 hours ago was dry now. Ordinary, indistinguishable from every other square of pavement on the block. The camera above the lamppost recorded the empty street. The city moved around the building the way it always did, without ceremony, without pause, entirely indifferent to the fact that inside a fourth-floor apartment, two people were sitting down at a kitchen table to have the conversation that everything had been building toward. Some doors, once opened, do not close again. Some questions, once asked in earnest, demand answers that reorganize everything that comes after them. Some mornings arrive gray and cold and withholding, and then, without announcement, become something you did not expect. The baby was fine. Amara knew it. She had known it on the sidewalk, and she knew it now. And she would know it every morning after this one. Not because someone powerful was in the room, not because the threat had been neutralized and the case was closing, and the man who had ordered the message would answer for it through channels that would not bend. Not because of any of that. Because she had decided. On the cold, wet pavement, with her hand flat against her stomach and the city indifferent above her, she had made the decision that some people spend entire lifetimes approaching and never quite reaching. The decision that the thing she was carrying was worth every complication that surrounded it. That she was equal to those complications. That being equal to them did not require her to face them alone, but also did not require her to be saved. She had stood up. She had walked home. She had built something from nothing, from memory and detail and the disciplined attention of a woman who had never learned to look away. The rest was already in motion. The rest would be fine. If this story moved you, take a moment and really ask yourself, have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought your silence meant weakness? Someone who looked at everything you were carrying and saw only a target? Have you ever loved someone whose world made loving them dangerous and stayed anyway? Not out of weakness, but because walking away didn't make the danger disappear. And have you ever had to choose between being saved and saving yourself? Tell us your story in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe in stories about dignity, resilience, and the kind of love that asks permission instead of taking it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.